Hello everyone and welcome to Wednesday, September 9th of the 23rd week in Ordinary Time of our liturgical year. Our salvation and perfection consist of doing the will of God, which we must have in view in all things and at every moment of life. Seek God in all things, and you shall find God by your side. Seek God in all things, and you shall find God by your side. These are the words of the saint whose feast we celebrate today, Saint Peter Claver. Peter Claver was born in 1851 in Spain, and when he was old enough, he moved to Barcelona to study, and there he entered the Society of Jesus, or many of us know as the Jesuits. One of the other Jesuits, named Alphonsus Rodriguez, saw something in the young Peter Claver and encouraged him to join the missions to the New World. Peter said yes to that invitation and was sent to Cartagena, Colombia, and eventually was ordained there to the priesthood. Spain had been part of the slave trade for over 100 years by the time Peter Claver arrived to Cartagena. Cartagena was one of the two ports where enslaved people from Africa arrived to be sold throughout South America. In Cartagena, Peter Claver witnessed the cruelty of the slave trade, and moved by the suffering of those enslaved, he chose to bring them both bodily and spiritual aid. Each month, when the slave ships would arrive, he would meet the ships in the harbor. He would board the ship to care for the terrified men, women, and children. The trip that they would have just endured would have been a living hell. Shackled together in the bottom of the ship, little food or water, and diseases of all kinds were common. It is said with each trip from Africa, over 1/3 of the people would die before ever reaching South America. His first priority was to try to tend to the sick and to baptize those in immediate danger of death. He would board the ship right into the midst of all of that filth and sickness and suffering, and would bring food and water and a caring face and touch. He said this: "We must speak to them with our hands by giving before we try to speak with them with our lips." To speak with them by our hands by giving before we speak to them with our lips. Peter Claver would also travel the countryside from plantation to plantation, visiting those who were enslaved and tending to their physical and spiritual needs. And when he spoke about Jesus, because of the language barrier that they would encounter, he often used pictures to represent biblical stories. It is said that St. Peter Claver baptized and taught the faith to more than 300,000 enslaved people during his 40 years ministering among them. For as many who supported him in this work, there were many who disparaged him and said that he was tainting the purity of Christianity by working among those people many thought were subhuman. His main goal was to reach their hearts, to remind them that as children of God, they were loved and deserving of dignity and respect. Peter Claver died in 1654, and he was canonized in 1888. And that Jesuit long before who encouraged him to go to the New Year, Alphonsus Rodriguez, he was canonized with him on the same day. St. Peter Claver is considered the patron saint of African Americans and African missions. In fact, on this very feast day of Peter Claver, the bishops of the United States are urging Catholics to pray and to fast for an end to racism. At 3 p.m., if you'd like to go on the Facebook page of the Diocese of Metuchen, there will be, you can join them live praying the rosary, or you can pray the rosary at any time on your own today to pray for the end of racism. Given all that's happening in our country these days on the issue of race, this feast day offers to us a role model of someone who looked past what society deemed as acceptable, namely slavery, when others, including governments and people who called themselves Christians, they saw slaves. But St. Peter Claver saw beyond that and saw a human being, someone deserving of love and kindness and respect. Think about this. St. Peter Claver died in 1654, and here we are in 2020, 366 years later, and the impact of the sin of slavery and racism is still with us. I think that this feast day and St. Peter Claver extends an invitation to us to look within our hearts. And who do we view at times as unworthy of our time or our care or respect? The challenge he offers is not just about race, but about the larger issue of how we look upon one another, seeing one another as a sister and a brother, seeing one another as a beloved child of God, seeing one another, whether it's a family member or a complete stranger, and to see that person's humanity and worth. How is St. Peter Claver speaking to your heart today? When someone encounters me, what glimpse of God do they experience? Do they have some experience of the love that God has for each of us? Please know that I continue to pray for you and for all those you love. I hope that you are well. These have been beautiful days, haven't they? And I hope that you've been able to enjoy them. I'm thinking especially about those who are in the initial days of school and sending many prayers to all of you. And until we see each other again, I wish you much hope and much peace.